Greenhill Fall Classic 2023 Round 1 versus Southlake Carrol AS.
I'm good to go whenever.
Are you ready, Judge?
Yeah.
Alright, I'll start on my first word.
Contention 1 is framing. Ethics must begin a priori first. Moral truth, quality of being prescriptive means we cannot use how people are to determine how they should be. That's Napoleon 8:16. Connection between moral truths, their content, and the way we discover truths a priori known through reason alone. The intent of the argument could then deduce more specific truths, fundamental truths are a priori, because truths are prescriptive, because as a moral law, applying to all rational beings cannot be discovered through experience. One cannot learn how one should from how people do. Universality makes them impossible to discover. Posteriori, observing how things go. Intuition might how they must go. Moral truths, true, all contexts. And second, anything else is regressive because it lacks a starting point. When we ask why we should do something, we ask for a reason. That concedes the validity of reason, so it's the only thing that we can follow. Next, we as human beings have an innate and intrinsic right to freedom, which is the basis for moral decision making. That's Ross Row 7. One innate right, freedom, and independence from being constrained insofar as cannot coexist with freedom of others. They cannot impose happiness on citizens would be for who were to treat citizens and assume unable to understand and useful or comfortable themselves. Moral cannot be based on happiness or empirical good. Ethics is autonomy, practical reason based on law. Happiness universally sought, not specific enough to entail universal desires. Hence, universal principles cannot be based on happiness. A human being's use of choice is free in the transcendental sense. Rights based on free choice and that justifies universality, must be true in all instances. Otherwise, they cannot inform all decision-making as they would be non-binding. Universality resolves this by, because the same action will be moral every time. Coercion or denying others their freedom is non-universalizable, because the coercers will be unable to coerce others as their decisions are not their own. While agents have an innate right to freedom that is not unlimited, the state is entered to arbiter between rights claims and enforced punishment for those who violate them. That's Ross Row 7. State might seem limitations to possess power to control freedom through force. There is no right to unlimited freedom, only innate right to freedom. The state is the means for freedom when directed. Maintain freedom in action aimed at hindering actions that hinder freedom of others, freedom of every member as a human being, equality, independence as citizen. And because the state of nature is unable to secure people's innate right to freedom due to unilateralism and the inability to acquire external objects, we are morally obligated to create a state governed by an unlawful will to enforce the people's rights. That's how get Bill 22. Argument for the state begins with universal right acting. Your action is right if it can coexist with freedom, holding that you decide what ends you use, opposed to having someone else decide for you. Hindering freedom of someone, infringing freedom is hindering a hindrance. Freedom hence consistent with universal laws. Freedom only an original right, rights to external objects acquired only provisionally in the state of nature. Since one can offer over objects belonging to someone, we can't be acquired, we must establish the state. Authority solves assurance, not under obligation to leave objects untouched, unless everyone behaves with same principle. State resolve this, providing law-giving with power. And since a unilateral will cannot impose obligations because it is inherently immoral, therefore such a state must be governed by an unlawful will. That's Powell 22. Unilateralism is a problem in the state of nature. Cannot put everyone under obligations. Some condition requires that will is unilateral a priori necessarily. Only will that is law-giving unilateral cannot serve as a law since infringing on freedom. Legislative authority authorizing acquisition outlines clear freedom requires possibility of acquiring objects. External objects cannot be required unilaterally. No need for state that replaces unilateral will and unilateral will. And what is unilateral will? Act people form the state alone. Legitimacy of the state. Everyone gives up freedom to take it again. Rule by law. Realize what official act for public purposes all required for legislative to be unilateral. It's distinct between public and private purposes. Act for public when act for creating right for condition. And thus the standard is consistency with the unilateral will. Ideal theory is good, criticism of its misapplication, only analysis of ideal theory can allow non-ideal theory to effectively guide action as hollow. The objection is that ideal theory is objectionable because it abstracts. Mill's argument hinges on particulars like idealizations of ideal theory might serve ethnic minorities ignored in contexts like Nigeria's where explicit reference to ethnicity is strict domination, specifically other capital factors we need to present them. Pointing out disparities may be good against those who deny racism, supposedly were persuaded racism pervades society with granularity serve, confronting racial injustice that cuts to cross differences, unity across difference motivates the use of idealization, replacing ideal with non-ideal could be counterproductive to the ontological framing that's somehow intrinsically immoral to theorize without explicit reference to oppression, making explicit reference would be principle and broader themes of justice versus academia and erase my ideal theory inherent with non-ideal theorizing about oppression explicitly. Campaign to change how philosophers are educated is hard to attribute an empty content as the content of ideal theory itself. Despite intentions, efforts on the injustices are not uniformly positive. There is an intent foresight distinction. We cannot be held morally culpable for consequences we can foresee because they cannot be calculated due to the unpredictable nature of our reality. Consequences spiral out and predictions of the future are unverifiable. That means consequences and empiricism cannot guide action. We cannot predict the future and can always imagine anything happening because of that. If consequentialism is the basis for action, the ethics, it freezes action because it creates infinite obligations. Additionally, we refer on resolutional specificity. Kantianism is uniquely good for rights discourse because talk of rights comes from a Kantian perspective. Rights are universal, inalienable rights held by a root of natural rights, hold what naturally is ought to be. The roots of rights lie in Kant, moral philosophy, and actually deemed right or wrong on the basis of universalizable duties and non-categorical imperative human rights by their expression in international instruments, including rights to housing. Everyone has the right to a standard of living human rights understood as moral statements about human beings. And contention two is offense. The United States ought to guarantee the right to housing. The first is political agency. Housing is prerequisite to that because the unhoused are excluded from civic participation. Capitalist foundations of independence. The state should support right to housing women of color, vulnerable because they do not own a home, women often accept poverty wages for fear of homelessness. The right to housing is a form of judicial vote. Unhoused persons do not have civic existence. Housing rights are crucial in the aftermath of the economic crisis. Seek compensation for discriminatory housing practices and but ideal theory first, identifying correct injustice, that shall be. Not ideal theory cannot see without standards of justice, not clear how we should respond to injustice without knowing what makes the scheme unjust when values completely we're uncertain about what justifies where there is disagreement. We won't know what aspects of society should be altered in the absence of systematic conception. And second is dependency. Dependence restricts the ends and agents can pursue, which is wrong, because it means the choice is made or not your own. Homeless people lack the ability to make decisions on their own and therefore do not have agency because of the fact that they are reliant on others' goodwill in order to survive. That's Ripstein 1. Public right is a united will, depends on one upon an inherent and private charity is inconsistent with united will. A world in which one person has the power over another is inconsistent even if the situation came about through private transactions in which neither did the other wrong. Your right to use your own person depends on another person who dependent on the grace of another is not merely lacking in self-determination. Conduct cannot be a bargain. Parties enter into the person has no capacity to set and pursue their own purposes. Death is no significance to right, but if another determines whether you in control of your own person, you are subject to that person's choice. And conditionality is a voting issue. It skews strategy as it allows them to kick our offense, and the opportunity cost to a bad disadvantage should be the same as a bad counterclaim. Kondo kills a substantive topic education because it means and this incentivizes offense against counterclaims because if we straight from the net benefit, then they can always kick it, and a disposition on which solves their offense because if we perm, then they can't kick.
Got it.
Cool. Good for cross.
Yeah, just give me a second. Okay. Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Cool. Start now. This like Fitzpatrick and Watts evidence at the end of the framing, is this like the only like theoretical reason to refer to the framework?
What do you mean? Like,
is this the only theoretical reason to refer to Kant? Like this like resolutional specificity?
well, I don't think that's necessarily a theoretical argument. I think that's just like when we're talking about the resolution, it's well, actually, sorry, it is. Yes, it is the only quote unquote theoretical.
Okay,
argument.
so this is the only theoretical. Okay, that's fine. Does the AF like implement like a positive right?
What do you mean by that? Like
does the government actually go out and like implement a right? Like does it actually go out and do something?
the government has a moral obligation to implement at some point.
Okay, sure.
Like they have to guarantee the right to housing. They have a moral obligation under our framework.
Okay, so they have a positive right to like guarantee the right to
I would
housing.
say that it can be positive or negative.
Wait, how is it negative insofar as
Because there's different obligations. Like you wouldn't be able to criminalize homelessness and advocacy, like because that would violate that's like a negative right, and there's also positive rights components.
Wait, explain how it's a negative right. Like
It can be a positive or a negative right because it has components like a negative right to housing would be decriminalizing homelessness. Like you can't punish people for being homeless, and then the positive right would be providing supply. So
wait, but isn't it going out and like actually decriminalizing homelessness, things like that? Isn't that a positive right in and of itself?
I mean, I would say that's a negative right.
Wait, but you're actually going out and like you're instituting.
Well, we would say that the government is not allowed to make laws that criminalize homelessness. So I would say that it is a negative and a positive right.
Okay, that's fine. On the contention,
Yes.
I guess like this first card about political agency, like what's the warrant for why a right to housing causes civic participation?
Because unhoused persons are not able to have like a civic existence because they're basically like they don't have the ability to act. It's just
wait, where is that in the evidence? Where in the
substantiated by the Ripstein card.
Wait, can you just point me to like a line in this like agency card that says that a right to housing causes civic participation?
It doesn't cause civic participation. It's intrinsically necessary for it because people who
Yeah,
do not
can you
have
just point me to a line
homes
that
are
says
excluded
where does it say
due
that
to
in the
dependence
evidence?
on others.
Yeah, where does it say? Just point me to a line that says that like it's necessary for civic participation.
No, this is the internal link to the dependency card. So it says, in the Ripstein evidence, it says dependence of one upon an other inherent private charity is inconsistent with united will. I can explain that, but it's the internal
Okay, sure. So this dependency card, like, what does that have to do with like homelessness or a right to housing? It doesn't even like say the words.
Well, yeah, but we have an internal link to it. So basically, homeless people rely on others in order to get like food and shelter. So by providing a right to housing, we give them civic participation and
Wait,
freedom.
isn't this like consequentialist? Because
No.
you say that a right to housing would lead to
No,
eliminating
it
discriminatory
wouldn't
housing
lead to that.
practices.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What do you mean?
Wait, like, the entire like, impact of this is that like, a right to housing would lead to eliminating discriminatory practices.
It wouldn't lead to eliminating discriminatory practice. When did I say that?
Okay, sure. Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
I never said that.
Okay. Order is 3, then case. On case, it'll be the contention. All right. 1 and C is set.
I'll tell you what I have.
Sorry.
I'll tell you what I have. I'm done. Okay, I'm just
Good.
3 in contention.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just
Okay. Wait. Yes or no?
I am just gonna set the timer.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Prefer Util A, access versus key to access, topic, controversy, articles are written in the context of material, consequences for public and policymakers, anything relevant to the material work, and annexation, impact, and structurally determines beyond practice. B, key to quality, class framework means robustly justified case counterplans, this has a relevant way where the also favors contention level, the base of best constituted, valuable activity, and filtered reportable skills, and C, small schools only need you could generously be considered a calculator win, of members less variable, use less breadth of education, and analytics are more important, so big school block writing, hoses, and blocks no matter our favor based innovation, checks, coaching, institute structuralism, resource severities are inevitable, we solve things, still cards, on the fifth passage evidence, 1, just because the topic comes from a content perspective doesn't mean we must use content, using other perspective is good, and 2, we have an isolated theoretical reason why using a content perspective is necessarily good. The plain opens the flood against litigation, tyranny, and prioritization, and entitlements within rights. These are this disordered allocation of resources unintended at the same consequences opening the flood against litigation. Of course, where they say X and Y are minimum components of the right to housing would be bound for those determinations, even on lines of circumstances change due to complex determinations demanded by socioeconomic rights, and that overwhelms the courts and chills housing development. Variant 23, the right to housing makes it easier to sue governments who just acting on more affordable housing. The amendment provides new and legal avenues to hold diversity accountable for housing goals. The better actions through localities deviating from the right to housing would open up many more losses for making living housing more difficult. And litigation slows backgrounds in the biotech sector, disrupting innovation that stops extensional collapse. Grade 14, breakthrough street diseases, limit major challenges involving food, energy, and environmental achievements, hinge on innovation, biotech competitiveness, China's investing annual rate of growth rate of 20%. The United States forward as medicine, genetics can help stop healthcare costs and attract the industry, acting heavily achieving energy, water, food security, technology may be the only way to meet global standards in the energy sector, employ the biofuel, advancing science contributes the innovative solution to global challenges. The biggest challenge of the risk, the backbone is maintaining its quality and sufficient notices, the significant burden, improper decisions from resource setting, litigation is expensive, R&D, the other problem is cost and loss communities, the targets are often startups losses, must take 5 years time and money, otherwise devoted to innovation. There's a distinction between the housing rights and the right to housing. A right to housing is philosophically and semantically defined as a natural right not dependent on utility. King Code 3. There's a distinction in statutory and philosophical rights. The right to housing is a moral right that may or may not exist, and there is a normative condition distinguished from housing rights. Housing rights elucidate what's being entitled in the law does not tell us why rights themselves or themselves are important. They're also unable to inform us of what grounds to reduce statutory rights and housing rights. Rest on a right to housing. Housing rights tells what we have all of the while the right to housing is just why we should have a certain provision of housing rights. Different from state to state over time. The right to housing is a natural right attached to all non-relevant conditions depending on circumstances. Resources, housing and social right, places policy priorities ahead of citizens, and natural rights are negative rights. One, natural rights have been unanimously done. Negative rights requires that we save from prohibiting one another around. Positive rights require goods, services, at the expense of other persons. Positive rights trump freedom, and no one can be justified in refusing service to others. And if the average is quantity framework, the reasonable burdens to prove a right to housing is a natural right, is 1, the king evidence outlines it semantically, and 2, entitlements and positive rights don't affirm under
property and frameworks as they are internally contradictory, which is warranted below. 1. A right to housing is a conflicting right and it has no concrete definition. Carrol 4. Rights do not conflict. Or right to housing when imposed a positive obligation through taxes limits on rentals. Those not housing have the authority to become a carpenter of housing. It is a right to property subject to appropriation for every person worldwide and had housing will qualify as housing sufficient to satisfy the right among practical questions involved. And 2. While when enforcing it, because you must know everything and act immediately, otherwise we allow injustice to occur. But these are simultaneously impossible because we cannot know everything about a particular situation. There is not infinite time to make an ethical decision, given that there must be deliberation over any moral decision to ensure its correctness in relation to the situation. The very act of deliberation is violent to allow the injustice to continue. But if you were to act and immediately you would act without proper knowledge which to correct injustice. And 3. Natural rights cannot depend on another right to exist. A. The right to housing is conditional on the government existing and enforcing it. The status quo proves that without the state the right does not exist, which means turning the NC non-uniquely have. And B. The condition is conditional upon resources and structures such as the existence of housing as in the first place, which is not a concern of natural rights as they exist simply due to the intrinsic nature of humanity. Now, in a case like the home is not necessarily precluded. You see, nearly individuals to still exercise their freedom to act. Multiple 19. The college between liberty and means not be drawn too sharply when a person's idiot is not seeking to be preoccupied with freedom. That means most of the person who waits the freedom to stay under the shelter of people around age, even when they are poor, even the most needy around us. One of the things that they're capable of doing for themselves, physical conditions is not comfortable, but they're capable of acting. And rent controls violate negative right to property, interfere with the free market, and necessitate tax hikes. Focus in 19. While the property owners have the right to seek rents and property should be allowed to produce sufficient income. Maintain market competitiveness. Rent control is not only the rights but investment in existing housing lower the value property affects the community's tax by causing a shift of the tax burdens to other types of real estate. Expensive enforcing rent control acts the cost of local government to defend the rights of property free controls and rent control as is counterproductive to the best interest of society and the economic well-being of the nation. And a right to housing is a positive right, has no concrete definition, and necessitates theft. Carrol 4. Rights do not conflict my rights to know infringes on your rights, your obligations, negative right to housing, but impose a positive obligation to exercise my rights, and they must be taken away from me through taxes or through limits on which those there is not housing. Supposed to not have housing. The authority to become a carpenter race and universal, not subject to borders, who passes the right people poverty will be subject to appropriation until every person in the world has what qualifies as housing sufficient to satisfy the right among us. Remember one of those practical questions involved. And a right to housing violates property rights of landlords. Greenhill 714 legislation defines the right to housing as a protection or evictions equal access to housing must be adequate. Landlords no longer evict tenants for non-payment of rent. Human rights and water law failed even though the eviction was a tiny expense relative to the state's budget. The state is willing to grant human rights and for G's who positive right to housing. The government must force others to give it to you by taxation or undermine property rights by limiting their right to evict you. Now, under their contention, first on part 1, cost-like consequences fail from their own framework, and 1, there's no warrant for why the right to housing is key to civic participation. It just asserts it. And 2, it is consequential. Specifically, the right to housing would lead to limiting discriminatory housing practices. There's no warrant for why this is intrinsically true. And 3, their empirical claim that women take on poverty wages so a right to housing would eventually help them is inductive and consequential. This claim is looking to how the consequences of the right would help women. And on the second card, 1, there's no linked card has nothing to do with homeless or right to housing. It's just a generic card about dependency. Hold the line. And 2, our Waldron evidence proves homeless people are free and have the autonomy regardless if they have a house. They're not dependent, they have the ability to act as they please. And reject one of your theory. 1 is 76 for times 2 and prefer times 2 because it's verifiable and quantifiable, but abuse isn't verifiable. And 2, the after which auto wins every single round if they just respond to everything in the 2 hour because there's no 3 hour to respond. And 3, the after compensate for abuse because they give 1 year restart, but the net can't.
Give the cross. Wait, what? Alright. Okay, I guess, so on this, what is this card that's, Wilkerson, it seems to be saying that lowering the value causes shifting tax burden. How is that not consequential?
No, we say that rent controls violate like a negative right to property. We say that people having rights to like, private property, things like that, and that like rent controls, eviction, things like that, violate that negative right to property. That's what the Wilkerson evidence is.
It also says rent controls hasten deterioration of existing housing and discourage new construction. So how exactly is that not like based on consequences?
Okay, sure, even if like the effects of rent control, we're just saying that rent control is a part of a right to housing, and that is intrinsically bad because it violates the negative right to property. The effects of rent control sure are consequential.
Rent control is part of the right to housing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's specifically we say that like a rent control is a right to housing. That's the Wilkerson 19 card. That's literally explains rent control is a right to housing.
So can you tell me why it says rent control is necessitated by right to housing?
Yeah, sure. Like the Wilkerson evidence talks about how a property should be able to produce sufficient income and maintain market competitiveness. That like consistent.
It doesn't say that a right to housing violates that. Where does it say a right to housing necessarily causes this, or is intrinsically bad because of this? Where does it say right to housing equals rent control?
Yeah, sure. A right to housing would mean that, like the Wilkerson evidence specifically talks about, it says that it's vital that property owners have a right to seek rents, and that property should be allowed to produce sufficient income. That's what the right to housing constitutes.
Okay, all right. I guess, like, were there any reasons to prefer Util other than the TFJs?
The TJFs. No.
TFJs, sorry. Okay. I guess this card about biotech
Yeah.
seems to be talking about like seems to be like what's the internal link between court and that?
Yeah, it talks about how the plan like opens up like a bunch of litigation, things like that, and that overrules the courts. Which, because like right now there's a lot of backlogs in the biotech sector, and if the right housing is implemented, it's going to cause those biotech cases to be pushed back, which swells biotech cases, like logs in the biotech sector, which are necessarily key.
Where does it say that that causes like extinction or whatever? Can you give me like the line?
Yeah, the rate evidence is like perfect for this.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Where's the line?
Of what? Like
That says there's no cause of extinction.
yeah, sure. It talks about. Let's see. Okay, sure. I guess it doesn't cause extinction, but like it's the only like it causes like it's these still are impact still acts even if they don't cause extinction.
Okay, so I guess like alright, so how does this third off like compete? Like what is this?
Yeah, sure. So it says that you have a burden to prove that a right to housing is a natural right because there's a distinction between housing rights and a right to housing. You conflate the two, and like giving housing to people is a policy you need to pass for like entitlement to exist. But a right to housing is a human right that you're born with regardless of policy or existence, things like that. That's the first argument. The second is that a right is a permanent aspect of human life which can't change, but a right to housing can change based on the economy.
Alright, I think I'm gonna take starting right now. Stop prep 135.
You use 225.
I use 220.
What was the order?
Or like that.
Yep.
Honestly, I think I'm just gonna sit down for this one because I need to be able to get my papers so I can't hold the laptop. The order is just gonna be the framing and then the contention, I guess. Framing, contention, util, TJF, court clause, right.
Wait. Sorry, can you repeat it?
It's
Let me it's what? Framing, contention, util, court clog, and then the right stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me when you have it.
I got it.
Okay. Framing, contention, util, court clog, rights.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Okay, we ready?
Okay.
Regardless of any theoretical arguments made, they have conceded that ethics must begin a priori because of the E's lockout, which means even if util is theoretically better, util is impossible to use. That takes out all of their offense, and it means that we've decisively won the framing debate. But I'll extend my offense here. In order to have political agency, a right to housing is necessary. People are coerced by others because they are reliant on others due to lack of a home. It means unhoused people lack a civic existence, as their choices are not their own. People who are dependent on others, like homeless people, lack self-determination, lack access to their right to freedom, which outweighs under Kant. Their answer to this is that it has nothing to do with this, but they have ignored the fact that it is internal link. The Ripstein evidence is the internal link from the first card, which specifically articulates that people who do not have a home do not have agency, and the dependency card independently is good because of the tagline, which, while I accepted it and it wasn't on the doc, the tagline that I gave for that is that homeless people are reliant on others because they do not have the ability to fend for themselves, because they're relying on other people to give them food and other people to give them shelters, like homeless shelter. But the right to housing is morally obligated because otherwise homeless people are dependent on others, and the role of the affirmative is not necessarily this proof that the consequences of voting affirmative are good, but that the government has a moral obligation to do so, which means that only non-consequentialism can be used to evaluate the round on their arguments on the offense. They say that lacking a home doesn't preclude agency, but this is bullshit, because homeless people that are starving on the street obviously do not have the ability to have agency insofar as they are reliant on others for their basic needs to be met. That means that the government would have a moral obligation in order to help these people and provide them their natural right to housing because of, or not naturally, their right to housing because of the fact that otherwise they are left in the cold with basically nothing, and they would be unable to access that. And on the point about it's not consequentialist, because we're not saying that that is our internal link card, but the Ripstein card is a little more extending of offense, and they say that rent control is bad, but I'll answer that here on the rent control stuff. The Wilkerson thing, no link, the app is not rent control. It is their job to explain why it is. The 1AC depends on freedom from homelessness, but that does not necessarily provide implementation, but I'll give implementation here. Normal means is increasing supply of housing as a right, encourage investments in housing construction, affordability, right to housing established, legal obligation to provide a roof for people. That means that normal means is building houses, and that the government has an obligation to build houses for homeless people, not necessarily rent control. And they say that it is property, that it is theft, but we are the only ones who have read normal means claims for how we define the right to housing in this debate, which means that this is taken out, and they say that it violates the property rights of landlords. Again, this is answered by the fact that the government has the obligation to build housing, and they say to reject one-error theory. Okay, fine. Or actually, no. One-error theory is good. It's key to check 1AC abuse. Otherwise, it can be infinitely abusive. 1AC spikes do not solve because nobody likes those. They're blippy and underwarranted, and we need to be able to react to the specific abuse in the round. TJFs. Regardless of any TJ, you should reject TJFs. We'll concede that ours was bad. TJFs are bad for topic controversy, and that because rather than engaging with the warrants in the 1AC, they then up-layer the theory, which is bad because it kills Phil education. This isn't read a book, but deliberation over engagement over whether or not the government has to provide a right to housing is key to substantive topic education over philosophies and their application in the real world, which means that none of this, and additionally, they've conceded that Util is impossible. We're wrong. I'm just going to read the one card here, but 1533 climate litigation stuff, that's 423. Litigation about countries reduce emission number double litigation is that they continue to increase from 15 to 22 in the United States. That means they do not have impact uniqueness, and that you should reject it on face here. On their rights argument, cross supply our normal means card here. Additionally, they say that we have the burden to do that. The app burden is to prove the government is morally obligated to provide a right to housing. We've defined what the right to housing looks like. The right to housing does not have to be a natural right because we have counted and find that it's on them to then answer our evidence here. Their thing where they say that it is extinction, but we are not. That does not necessarily apply. You should prefer our evidence because it's most contextual to topic, literature, and recency. And they say that it's conflicting right and has no concrete definition. We solved that. We provided definition, and they say that it's violent when enforcing it. That's wrong. We don't necessarily have to be violent when enforcing it. And that would be wrong because it would violate their intrinsic rights. And they say natural rights cannot depend on another right where entity do exist. But the state of nature and our syllogism from the 1AC, which was conceded, is that the state does exist. So even under that deontological state does exist. So it's not conditional.
All right, cool. 4 minutes of prep. Time starts now. What was that last argument on the rights and C?
It's not conditional because our syllogism warrants in the 1AC prove that the state will exist.
Okay.
Anyone know where our economy is?
I think it's 1 minute. Was this like TJFs thing implicated as like a voting issue? Like they reject TJFs?
Yeah.
Alright, cool. That's time. Order's gonna be really quick on like the TJFs bad and then the right sense.
No dot, right?
No, no. Everyone good?
The right sense C thing, it's the TJS from the right sense.
Yeah, we'll be really quick on the TJFs bad and then the right sense.
Okay.
Alright, cool.
On TJFs bad, you read a TJF yourself, so you violate and, or TJFs are impact terms because we prove they're good for topic controversies. These articles are written in the context of material consequences for the public and policymakers and anything relevant to the material world and extinction impact which structurally determines premier impact which we are like our TJF is anything turned to the topic controversy argument and they read a TJF themselves, so they violate. Now under the right to Firstly, the right to housing does not have to be a natural right, but it does. It conceded two key words that lose them in this debate. The first is there's a distinction between the housing rights and a right to housing. They conflate the two. Giving out housing to people is a policy you need to pass to allow the entitlement to exist. But a right to housing is a human right you were born with, regardless of the policy or existence of the state. Like a right to life or a right to freedom. And two, the right is a permanent aspect of human life. It doesn't depend on external circumstances. Rather, it's operating truth of humans. And housing rights change based on the state of the market, which they linked to proven by their first word of office. It says that we need a right to housing because of economic issues in the status quo. So naturally, once those issues and housing rights are not needed, a right to housing doesn't depend on anything. It just exists as a permanent aspect of being a human. If you see these 2 points, which means that a right to housing has to be a natural right. And this is that for further evidence, this is most contextual, but there's no explanation for this whatsoever. They literally say this. Whereas our king evidence is very good for this. It explains how the word ought means moral obligation. The king evidence itself outlines that if a right to housing is put in a philosophical context, then it has to be viewed as natural rights. Just semantically and philosophically defined that way. And it's structurally the same as a right to life or a right to freedom, a right to private property, etc., which are all natural rights as well. It means you can prefer the king evidence, we can explain that a right to housing is a natural right since philosophically and semantically defined that way. That was conceded. Next, they say that they solve for the violence argument because the violence argument because they provide a definition. They completely misunderstand the argument. We are saying that it's violent when enforcing it because you must know everything and act immediately, otherwise you allow injustice to occur, but these are impossible because we cannot know everything about a particular situation because there's not even a time to make an ethical decision. And given that there must be deliberation over any moral action to ensure its correctness in relation to the situation, the very act of deliberating and things like that is violence because as you allow the injustice to occur, if you allow the injustice to occur, and if you were to act immediately, you would act without the proper knowledge to determine if the correctness is just the injustice. That's the violence argument. It goes completely misunderstood. They just say they provide a definition. That's not what the argument is saying. Next, they say that their evidence proves that the state will exist no matter what. One, they don't give a warrant for this whatsoever. They say that their evidence, they don't point to a specific line of evidence or what evidence says this. And two, they misunderstand our argument. We say that natural rights cannot depend on another right or entity to exist. And because A, the right to housing is conditional on the government existing and enforcing it. The status quo proves that without the state, the right does not exist. We turn and see non-UBC app and haven't proven why the state always exists. And they say that they've proven that the state will always exist. They do not point to a single piece of evidence in the 1AC. And they also can see the B point saying that it's conditional upon resources and structures, just the existence of housing in the first place, which is not a concern of natural rights. This exists simply due to the intrinsic nature of humanity, which means that a right to housing is conditional because it's conditional upon having the resources and structures in place to even implement the existence of a right to housing, which is not a concern of natural rights because natural rights are always like just God given. You always have them, like a right to life or a right to freedom. And Top level, they don't meet their burden of affirming. If the illegal looks at it, they have to use a constant framework with reasonable burdens to prove a right to housing is a natural right, since one, the king evidence outlines it semantically, and two, entitlements of positive rights don't affirm under constant frameworks since they are internally contradictory, which should be warranted, and therefore they don't meet the burden of affirming, which means you can negate on their rights to see.
Okay, I have 1 minute and 35 seconds. Okay. It's just going to be the and then the neg. Can I borrow your phone?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wrong paper.
The top level issue that frames the round here is that they have conceded our offense on the case page, which means that the right to housing is both a positive and a negative right, in that insofar as it can be both, because it necessitates not only building housing, but it also necessitates a freedom from the government of putting laws in place to discriminate people based on their quality of being homeless, which means that the government is not allowed to decriminalize homeless, which means that we do meet a burden in some way, in that we do prove that the government has a moral obligation to implement a negative right. And next on this next argument here is on the counter burden, which was conceded, which is that the role of the affirmative is not necessarily to prove that the consequences of doing it. There are agreements or consequences which they say about how the government will not always be able to enforce it or whatever, and it's conditioned on the government existing, but we do not need to prove that the consequences of doing it are good. We just have to prove that at some point the government has a moral obligation to guarantee the right to housing, which is defined by the 1AC evidence as both a positive and negative right, insofar as the Ripstein and the other card, which I forgot the name of, are clearly articulate that the right to housing has two components, insofar as people need to not be criminalized for being homeless, and that we need to build houses for those people so that they may access political agency. But ultimately, the negative has made it very clear that this argument is simply saying that we have not met our burden, but they have not met a burden, they have not given a claim, so this is functionally just a reason why you should vote affirmative on presumption, but they have not contested the fact that the government has a moral obligation to guarantee the right to housing, which was the counter burden. And on their arguments here, they say that we didn't say that how the government will always exist, but our cards answer this. We shouldn't need a full minute-long extension of them, because you dropped them from the 1AC. Our evidence clearly warrants in the syllogism that due to the fact that the state comes out of the state of nature, due to the fact that people cannot acquire external objects, or there is no mechanism to enforce between rights claims, which means that the state will always exist and is necessary in order to secure people's rights. That means that it isn't conditional, and this answers that argument here. Their argument doesn't cut it, and they say it's violence when enforcing it. It's not. They haven't articulated how the right to housing being enforced by the affirmative, or we don't even defend enforcement, really. We just defend that the government has a moral obligation to do it at some point, somehow, which means that there isn't necessarily a reason why the right to housing is violent. And on this argument about the right to housing being conditional, conditional that was above and the resource argument? No, we say that they always have this moral obligation to do this, and they say that they don't meet this burden, but we do. They've dropped the counter burden, and additionally that we do defend it as a positive and a negative right. So ultimately, you should vote affirmative on presumption here if you don't want to deal with this, because the fact that they have not given you a reason why the government does not have a moral obligation to do this, which was the role. They've not met their role as a negative, and functionally also they haven't contested the act is a good idea, which means that you should presume affirmative here in that they haven't contested if like the plan is a good idea or not. So the bottom level issue that decides this debate is that they think that we've dropped things that we haven't, and they haven't understood the connection between the specific pieces of evidence and how that implicates throughout. Insofar as from cross-sex and onwards, I've clarified that the right to housing is both positive and negative. That means that we meet the burden that they want us to meet, because even if a positive right would not be good, we meet the burden by proving a negative right. That solves their offense, and due to the concession of case and framework, the act wins this debate. Thank you. Here you go.
Debate.
Good debate. I gotta go find a water. Oh wait.
Is there not one over there?
There is, but it's only like fill up. But I just realized I have a bottle.
Oh.
Kind of stupid.
missing round one.
Huh?
Apologies for missing round one.
You missed round one?
Yeah. Here, so superior.
You missed both?
I slept through 7 alarms. It was kind of bad. Like, I was falling asleep at the wheel last night.
Let me talk to you about this after I finish this decision.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I'll let you.
Also, like, so tragic. Like, what?
Yeah, it is really tragic, but there's probably a world in which I will judge them. There'll probably be a matchup where I get pressed again.
In a minute it will be. When does the second round start?
What?
11.
You got time.
Are you after next?
I'm the first, so that's fine.
Oh. Or wait, yeah, you always have the opposite.
Yeah.
This name of gay dude. Not very nice. Brian, what did they say? I didn't say anything, Joey said it was base. We don't have anyone who appreciate the combat better than Jared does. What about Jared? Oh, wait, no. Jared hates it. What Jared hates it? Yes. I'm really just trying to true. I'm not gonna lie. Jared just thinks it's Jared thinks a lot of things. Wait, actually, he thinks it's true. He thinks it's more not necessarily the pterodactyls. Okay. I actually read, like, if you want. So what if they're everything? The catastrophe. No, like literature, not reading everything and doing homework. I would be like, no, it's really interesting. I go.
Alright, I'm in. I vote negative. I'm not really super happy with this decision. I think the problems start with the 1NC construction. The 1NC is a minute under time. You read TJFs without a justification for why TJFs come first. You read a disad without a terminal impact. You don't read an extinction first prior, which probably should be in the 1NC, right? I think you read an NC that, do I particularly understand it? Like, not really. I think you should probably set up a 1NC that is better. If you're not feeling time, take some prep for it, right? This sets up like better 2NRs in front of me. I don't think this is like the kind of 2NR you want to give in front of me. I definitely don't think this is the kind of 2NR that you want to give in front of most of the judges in this pool, based on my sense that it's kind of policy leaning, right? But kind of here's how the decision kind of breaks down. I think like top level, I'm very confused about what a 2NR goes for the TGF flow at all. I feel like this should be like part of the 2AR because there is no reason to reject a team that I understand coming out of the 1AR. In addition to putting ink on the TGF spell, you also go for a TJF. You go for the the topic controversy TJF, right? Which seems to be a reason why you are proactively justifying utilitarianism. I think the 2AR should just be like, you have proactively extended the justification for util, right? You have not extended any consequentialist offense, right? Here are all the reasons why passing the affirmative is good for homeless people. That's the bottom of the 1AC. Vote affirmative on either presumption or because util is true and there's no offense, right? GG, the round is over, right? I think like that should have probably been the 2AR. I really think it's like a pretty significant mistake for you to spend time on a TJF flow at all in the 2NR. But I end up thinking a little bit about this, and I think to myself, well, the 2AR probably should have caught that. Should I like intervene in your favor to like In the context of a really, really blippy kind of extension, right? When you're kind of going for your framework, I end up thinking like, well, I'm not going to do that for you because the 2AR probably should have caught it. The central problem I have with the 2AR is that you are making some arguments that I like. I think this MC is kind of silly. I think there's a significant gap between the 1AR and the 2AR. And then I'm thinking that because these arguments, I cannot find them in the 1AR, I'm inclined to err negative on these questions. For example, this I defend both the negative right, positive right thing. That argument is made in 1ACCX, right? I do not have it in the 1AR. I don't think that's good enough, right? I think the responses probably need to start in the 1AR. And also this counter burden stuff, I just don't have it prior to the 2AR. So I'm inclined to protect the 2AR from these arguments that are made earlier in the debate but are not in the 1AR. And I waffle a bit here because kind of the question that I do not have a particularly good answer to is how the NC negates. The way that I understand the syllogism is that positive rights are incoherent. King seems to operate as a pseudo-topicality argument, but it is not implicated that way in the 2NR, right? It seems to just be implicated as a reason why, if positive rights are incoherent, then you have offense under Kantianism because only negative rights are reasons for the government to do things, right? And so the positive rights stuff probably answers the half of the AC offense that the 2AR goes for that is not the we prohibit the government from criminalizing homelessness type stuff, right? And I'm left with I guess there's some chance of offense off of the whatchamacallit, of violent enforcement, or you don't know if the conditionality type stuff at the bottom of the 2NR, which is part of the NC flow, right? But I really think to myself, should I just vote on presumption given my lack of understanding of why the NC negates? And I just don't think the speech is particularly good here. But the 2AR ends up being pretty new, and because it's pretty new, and you don't go for what I think is the winning 2AR in front of me, which is the potentially I think the TGF stuff, or making better responses than the 1AR, I think on this flow, for example. This idea that it should just be I hear a lot of the explanation of the NC, and it just sounds like what the app is, right? You need to have a moral obligation, it needs to be permanent. Need to this stuff about how oh, I don't defend implementation, I don't defend I just think that as a general concept people deserve the right to housing, right? I think that stuff probably just answers this MC pretty well, and it should be in the 1AR. Do we have questions about the decision?
Should the 2NR been straight then, or what do you think?
Can you be a little more specific?
Yeah, I guess should I have taken one of the case turns? Right to housing was or I guess taxation is theft or whatever, just gone through one of those instead of the rates NC.
I don't think the 1AR answers on the NC are particularly good, so I guess in that context the 2NR collapse makes sense, right? But I don't think you have a huge amount to work with going into the 2NR. You can't go for this, that, you're definitively losing the Util debate. I just don't think you have very many options. I think those changes start with the 1NC and constructing different arguments. Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I guess was there a way to give a winning 2AR other than the Util thing?
Well, I think that would have been clever, and I considered voting on it even absent the 2AR on that decision because I just think the 2NR is not very good here and allocates time strangely. I guess kind of what you want to pin it down to is just be what is the offense, right? And if there's no offense underneath the framework, all they have is just we don't have offense functionally is what the argument is in the NC, right? Which is, I think, a justification for the presumption push. I think that requires you to answer quote unquote what the offense happens to be in the NC, right? Which I ultimately think the 2NR does not do particularly well, but I waffle enough on this question because I don't think the 2NR is very good on this. There's probably a version of the speech that picks up my ballot, but a lot of it is new, right? And I think you need to hold your feet to the fire about stuff that's not in the 1AR.
I guess what are some arguments that you think would have been good or persuasive to you with the rights and
In the 1AR?
Yes.
Well, I think you should just push it across. Why does it negate?
Yeah. I guess like should I
Like, it just seems to like be adding like a side constraint to the framework, right? Like, I don't know.
should I like put like a huge presumption first in the line and see who's gone for presumptions? They don't need the burden.
I think that would have helped.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because my lack of understanding of the offense, like,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of judges in the pool that would just be like, well, a negative doesn't do anything. I presume half or something like that. So I think that would be an improvement. But like, you have like a minute, probably a minute 30 to work with in the 1MC because you go for this like 1AR theory hedge that you expand. I'm not really sure what that's in there, right? You should read a terminal impact. You should read extinction first, right? You should read a proactive justification for like 2 TJFs first. I think all of that is fine. And I don't think the hedge is useful. Like if they read TJFs bad in the 1AR, just answer it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not that hard.
Okay.
I think it's weird that the 1AR answers the hedge, given that you're not reading a reason to reject the team, right? I think if you're going to do that, you might as well just read TJFs or a voting issue or something along those lines, right? I think that would have been fine. I think the 2NR anticipated that argument, which is why they like gave the speech that they gave or asked the question that they asked, like post the 1AR. But I don't understand there's a reason to reject the team coming out of the 1AR. I'm not voting on it in the 2AR, even if you go for it, given what is on my flow, right? So either don't answer the hedge and just like answer TJX like straight up, or answer the hedge and then read a natural shell. I think like either of those would be fine. But the biggest like change, like I don't even think you need much of a dump on the dissat. I think like one sentence on the dissat is like no terminal impact. Also, they haven't really justified a framework, and just like move on. Like you read a piece of evidence, I don't really think you need to do that.
Okay. I guess like for the TGFs, I was just thinking in terms of like, do you think that like considering the concession that ethics must begin a priori would not just take out the TJFs because there is no way to use Util, or is that like?
I think there are other ways for you. I think you can also answer TJFs in other ways. I'm not objecting to like the work on the TJFs. Well, I'm confused about why you answered the theory hedge.
Okay. Oh, that. Yeah. All right. Thank you. I guess. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much for the feedback. Yeah. Thanks for judging. Good debate.
That was great.
Wait, also, like, what do you think, should the one and C, like, should it have happened? How stuff should have been, like, a completely different strategy? Should I, like, line by line, like, the Kant framework? Or, like,
I don't really know what kind of debater you are, which like informs my recommendations, right? I think if you're gonna throw down on Util, you should just throw down on Util.
Okay.
And that could be like, that would mean like line by line the framework. That would mean reading like justifications for Util that are more robust than the ones that you came up with. That would mean like extinction first, right? But like you don't have an extinction impact, so I guess that doesn't matter.
All right, that makes sense. All right, thanks for the feedback.
Yeah. What are you doing here? Ah, you're judging these other people, huh? But not my kids?
Okay, it's because like it's gonna have a little better. Yes, I did get another sample.
We aren't going.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Yeah, you have to. Not a question. Usually clear the vote. Good. Sorry.
Lame.